What am I to do?
Welcome to RazorBranding Podcast with Jackie Russo. To learn more about how to improve your brand, visit brandrusso.com.
Hi, it's Jackie Russo. Thanks so much for joining us at RazorBranding Podcast. Today, I am both honored and delighted to have Sam from the Acadiana Center for the Arts joining us. It was sort of going to be in person for just a minute, but we went back to online like we're supposed to do. So Sam, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
So glad to be here too, Jackie. Thank you for having me on.
Well, you know, Michael made so many jokes before we went on about symphony and confusing the two. I was like, I'm going to say it wrong just because he planted that seed in my head. So luckily I managed to pull it off.
You pulled it out, no problem.
I did. It took a minute though. So Sam, how long have you been with the ACA? Because I feel like it's been forever and 5 minutes.
Well, I feel like 2020 alone has lasted about 18 years. But yeah, I've been here for 2 years as of October 29th. So just past my 2-year mark. Of course, the past 8 months of that have been in virtual quarantine.
Right.
But it's been it's been a wonderful time. I'm from Lafayette originally, so it's been 2 years back in town in general too. And yeah, it's good to be home.
Well, and when you left Lafayette, you went on this world tour of awesomeness, building up your resume. Why don't you catch us up a little bit on all the things you were doing for this big circle you made just to get right back to downtown Lafayette?
Well, I mean, I left, as a lot of people do, to go to college elsewhere. I went to LSU, studied Latin for some reason.
Sure, that's a big profitable endeavor, right?
It is. Yeah, most people get into Latin for the money.
Right, of course.
It's kind of like investment banking in that way. And of course, what you do when you major in Latin is the next thing you have to do is move to Edinburgh, Scotland. Which, again, just like investment banking. So, I was there in Edinburgh, did a master's program in business administration. And
is there a lot of Latin spoken in Edinburgh?
There's some languages spoken there, but I was very unclear as to what it was the entire time.
Do you own a kilt?
I don't.
Okay.
I think I'm entitled to my graduation kilt, but I neglected to attend my own graduation ceremony. Which would have required an additional flight back to Scotland. Now, of course, take an extra trip back to Scotland whenever you can get one, but it wasn't in the cards at the time. But I should have just bought the kilt and sat at home.
Right.
At least that would have been nice. I would have had to cross my legs, of course, because that's just decent. But while I was in Edinburgh, I worked for the Edinburgh International Festival, for the City of Edinburgh's government, kind of their governmental arts council there as well. And then I was in New Orleans after that, worked for the New Orleans Film Festival, the Arts Council, and then where I really landed was the Contemporary Arts Center, the CAC, for several years before finally kind of making my grand return to Lafayette as the executive director here at the ACA, the Acadiana Center for the Arts.
So if you were a Wheel of Fortune contestant, you can only buy letters of C's and A's, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think on Scrabble, there's some of the cheaper letters, but
Right. Easy to afford. So as you've made this whirlwind circle halfway around the globe and back again, what was it that drew you back to Lafayette? Was it the job? I mean, I'm sure friends and family and all those things you're supposed to say, but did we woo you back here because we let you run the entire arts and culture department of Lafayette?
Well, it certainly had something to do with it. But I mean, it's really for the same reason that I couldn't stay in Edinburgh, which wasn't because of passport reasons. It was because, when I was living and working in Edinburgh, it was, it's just amazing, beautiful town. They truly, truly value their arts and culture, and they value them as part of the quality of life, of why people want to live there, be there, of what, how they raise the stature of the community to this international scale, and how it, really helps provide a great economic driver for the city. You have millions and millions of people pass through Edinburgh for their festivals, all that stuff. And so this wonderful, flourishing place. And after, about a year of being there, I was saying, this is really great. Yeah. But this is really great for them.
Right.
It's not for me at the end of the day. It's a beautiful place. It's absurdly beautiful. What's happening is fun. This is all great. Seems like they've got it figured out. They don't need me here. And what I was really missing was the culture from the area that I grew up in, where we have this vibrant living culture that is our own, that lives in our music, in our dancing, in our food, and on and on and on, and how intertwined and alive that is in really just kind of the casual community here. And so certainly I've been looking for, a way to return to participate in that actively and from my professional capacity, really for my whole career. So yeah, it was very, very good to be able to come back in a professional role here, but certainly I always wanted to.
So what I hear you saying is you went haggis, étouffée.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd put haggis and boudin a little closer.
Okay, sure.
Haggis is almost like boudin without the rice.
Okay.
There's some, there's a lot of innards, there's a lot of unspeakables and unmentionables in there. Right. But yeah, essentially, haggis, boudin's delicious. Haggis,
yes, boudin wins every time.
Special occasions only on the haggis side. Boudin every day.
So you come back, you've been here about a year and a half, things are going well, and all of a sudden, March of 2020 happens. How much of the year had y'all, planned out, sold tickets to, had to cancel? I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, our kind of season, as we call it, essentially follows the school year. So we were kind of in that last stretch, looking ahead at a really busy April and May to close out our season. And, we actually had a really, really phenomenal show at ACA on March 10th. Scott Mulvihill, this bassist who I think was just on the Stephen Colbert Late Show last week. So he played the theater here. We had the Rayo Brothers open for him. It's just this cool night, a wonderful crowd, sold out show. And 2 days later, shut down. And we were really so looking. We had so many shows on the rest of our season that I was just thrilled about. And of course, they had to cancel what was remaining on that season, and we really have had to look at, okay, what can we even do? Looking ahead, as if you remember 8 months ago, how it seemed like the next 2 days were completely unpredictable. I feel like, now we're kind of back in that state again. Yeah. But you couldn't look ahead what seemed like more than 48 hours. And so we were trying to really plan for, okay, well, what are we going to do for the next year, for the next season that begins in the fall? How do we prepare for that? And how do we try to pivot, change, do whatever we can do? And so that's really where especially the difficulty began, because, as the situation continues and as these kind of phases keep getting pushed on and on and on, and how they're kind of poorly defined phases. It's like maybe in phase 3 you'll be able to do some of these things, but we're not going to tell you until phase 3 starts.
It's a surprise.
And so we did book a season, but we booked it with the full understanding, I think, of our audience members, our ticket buyers, as well as our artists and agents, which is if and when shows need to be rescheduled, they will be rescheduled. And they'll be rescheduled for another date. We'll punt it down the road. We'll let everybody know. And we'll just try to keep going that way and hope that doesn't happen for longer than we can bear it.
Yeah.
We'll just keep apologizing to people. Sorry. But I mean, that's just where we are, because that's where the entire world is.
Well, and I would imagine that so much of the ACA experience, or at least for me, it has been being physically in the building. Unlike the festivals that can go virtual, as a provider of venue space, you've done it, I think, a good job with Art Walk, and you've tried to kind of work around like the Illustrated Cafe, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But ultimately, you need people physically in your building. So what do you do in the meantime for budget?
Well, I mean, I'll just say on the term of people being physically in the building. Yeah, I mean, whether or not they're in our building, I think art is something that has real value and utility when people experience it together. Art is a way for people to share a common experience, to communicate something, whether it's just a beautiful thing or whether it's something that goes, I don't think that's art, and somebody else says, I think that is. And then they have a discussion about it. But art lives in people, and it lives in that space between people, which, can happen on the couch at home. certainly Netflix has a lot of great shows, but we think that it happens in our community when people come outside of their house or when they share space, especially outside of their immediate family members. So our goal has been to facilitate that in a really safe and reasonable way, because we've certainly seen businesses and places around Acadiana that are doing that in a not safe way. So it was one of our goals to say, okay, we need to show a gold standard of you can do this, you can do it. Sure, we have more space than most people do, so we're privileged in that way, but you can do it. And we think that, I believe that that's where culture really lives, is in those kind of physical spaces where people come together, where they create a community because they're chit-chatting, where they're sharing their ideas and their experiences. And that's what makes Acadiana amazing.
Right. Oh, for sure. So when you look at other arts centers that are similar to the ACA around the country or around the world, who do you think has really managed to continue to fulfill their mission well while being safe during these past 8 months?
Mm-hmm. I think you see a lot of the major museums that were able to reopen and kind of set their standard and say, look, you weren't supposed to touch anything in here anyway. And if you were doing that, you were already messing up.
Right.
So in larger museum spaces, they could welcome people back more easily than elsewhere. I think they've seen lags in audiences coming back very understandably, because it's still most advisable for people who are in the higher risk categories to completely limit themselves. That's devastating and sad, but that is the medical advice. And so I'm not going to give anything other than that. But yeah, you see leading museums. If you look at the MoMA in New York, if you look at Fritz in Nashville, if you look around the country, you have these great examples, and we're part of those networks, and we attend the same webinars and listen to the same podcasts about what we can do, what we should do. But so much of what we're focused on too is the artist during this time too, who as much as we serve the broad audience and trying to get them what we think of as a vital cultural experience, it's also about the artist during this time, where no other profession that I know of is as hardly hit. Maybe cruise lines, but when you think about musicians, when you think about kind of craftspeople who just don't have those places where they can get paid for their work, because festivals or little concerts aren't happening, or because the fairs and festival markets aren't happening. It's so many people, and I think the average person would be shocked at how large that economy is in our state, in our community, even compared to something like the oil and gas economy, where we think about oil and gas as this major driver. In 2018, the creative economy in Lafayette Parish was larger than the oil and gas economy. It was like $1.8 billion versus 1.6. So when you think about that, it's hidden to most people because it's not one big business knocking on doors saying, hey, we're important. It's a lot of little people and a lot of little transactions, microtransactions that build up to this big groundswell that ultimately makes this place a cool place to live.
Well, and it's a multifold approach, right? Because it's not just the places that we go here locally on a Friday night to hear a band or buy a CD. It's also the festivals that bring in visitors. So that entire cultural economy, as they call it, really is the day in, day out driver of so many other businesses, whether it's hotels and restaurants and art walks and all of those components of the arts, right?
Absolutely. You definitely have to think. I think of restaurants as cultural businesses. Again, maybe certain kinds of restaurants versus others, but no, we're not going to get into that discussion.
Right.
but that's the thing, is that it is the broader force of economic impact that happens when we have a vibrant, social and cultural life. They're inseparable from one another.
And I would agree. And I know there's this, and I don't want to touch the third rail, which is politics right now. But I do know that there are people who feel like the government in various ways should do more to help the cultural economy, and others who feel like they should do less and just focus on roads and ditches. So how can we find that middle ground or is there a middle ground where both sides can be heard and supported, and yet we can still thrive where we need to be?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, where's that road going to go, and why do people want to go there? You know,
Yep.
there are a lot of roads in this world that have zero economic benefit to the community. They don't produce jobs. They don't create prosperity. They don't create vibrancy. So it is about a balance. It's, you know, you need to have the infrastructure for people to live in a community, of course, but you also want people to want to live in that community. Otherwise, the infrastructure is irrelevant and pointless, you know, and
Right.
frankly, make the money.
Right.
So it is about a balance. And I think, you know, yeah, without getting into politics, I think there is a bigger case that needs to be made to our political leaders that, look, this is a driver of our prosperity as our community. And when we ask questions like, how do we grow as a community? You know, who do we want to be as a community? Where do we want to go? How do we ensure that, you know, our children's future will be brighter and more assured than our own present? And that's a really, really big conversation. And it's not just about roads and drainage and things like that. Yeah, that's maintenance. But when we talk about what do we really want to like invest in to make this place somewhere that, you know, 50 years from now is as transformed as Lafayette was and Acadiana was from 50 years ago to today, which I think people take for granted that transformation just happened on its own. So the question is, you know, what are we investing in today that will help us put, you know, be something transformed and new and wonderful 50 years from now? And for me, that the core nugget of that lies in our culture, and especially those institutions that are relatively small investments that help make it stand out compared to communities of our size, stand out, you know, shoulder and head above other kind of mid-sized cities. But we only stay there if we try to stay there. In Edinburgh, actually, there was a report in 2004, so a little before I was there, that they called Thundering Hooves, which sounds so much more impressive when you say it with a Scottish accent.
Sure.
But the Thundering Hooves report was all about Edinburgh is this amazing festival city. It's considered the European capital of festivals and really a world capital of festivals. The Edinburgh Fringe and the Edinburgh International Festival bring 5 million visitors to the city of Edinburgh over the course of 3 weeks, which is insane. It's a city of only 500,000 people too. So it effectively quadruples the population for any given period of time during that short span. And because of the infrastructure they put in place for that, they've created all these other festivals. There's so much year-round activity. There's visitors, but then it's also just a vibrant place to live, you know? But the Thundering Hooves report said that other cities are catching on, that this is a way that, you know, that Edinburgh and several other, you know, leading cities around the world had demonstrated that you can really lead economically by investing in culture. And other cities and other places are catching on, and they're catching up. And what that report said is that basically Edinburgh was taking for granted that they had these great institutions, that these great festivals, these great identities, but they really, at a certain point, had just kind of fallen flat in their support of them. They said, okay, well, you know, what we did last year, that's going to be good enough for this year too. Or, oh, well, it's you know, austerity time, so we're gonna cut here, we're gonna cut here because we're gonna cut everywhere. And what that report was saying was, they're catching up fast.
Mm-hmm.
The Thundering Hooves are right behind you. So where you want to be tomorrow is where you are today, which is at the head of the pack. You need to do something to get there. And I think Lafayette and Acadiana is in a much similar position, which is if we want to be ahead of the curve, especially on the other side of the pandemic, as no doubt many municipalities will scrap their arts and culture and their quality of life assets because they, are balancing a lot of different priorities, and that's understandable. But they also probably didn't have them as solidly as we do in the first place. So
Right.
if we can continue to invest, if we can continue to push ourselves to the forefront, just imagine where we can be on the other side of this. I mean, I'm excited by the idea.
Right.
Sure, it takes some surviving, some grit to get there, but I think we can be well positioned to be so far ahead of the curve because, as Ben Berthelot, and others will say, we don't have mountains, we don't have white sand beaches, but people do come here. Why do they come here? They'll come here for our culture. So my thought is that if we can basically make money by having a good time in town, why wouldn't we?
Well, and I think about the numbers that you just said. I think Festival International probably attracts 500,000, not 5 million. So to be able to get that tenfold and spread it out over 3 weeks instead of 3 days, there's a lot of potential revenue there, right? And so that does benefit us all when you look at sales tax, you look at hotels, you look at the people spending their money here. We all benefit in that revenue.
Yeah. And I think just back to the idea of like leadership and especially public investment, I think that's the role of public investment, is to say, look, we value this, but we would value it even more if you were twice as big or brought 3 times as many people. Now, we want to help you get there because we want that. I think, the previous administration had once said, Festival International, we would give them, the city would give them $200,000. And we thought it was a great deal because just in local sales tax collection, we get $1 million back from those 5 days. It was a really, I wish I could do that 100 more times.
Right.
What a good deal.
Right.
But
yeah. What investor wouldn't give 200,000 to get 1 million? I mean, that's
it's like, let's
5 for 1.
Checks. And the best thing is we can exchange the checks and then we can go see some cool music at the same time. And I mean, things like that are they're when put that way, I think anybody would get it, but I don't think that story is told enough.
Right. Well, do you think also it's part of this theory that I don't have to give you the 200,000 and I'll still get the $1 million?
I mean, it's certainly probably something that is thought, but I've never seen evidence of that working.
Right.
When the idea of, the private sector needs to step in and support this. The private sector is already there. And it's these nonprofits go to the private sector, go to individual kind of philanthropists, which our community does not have a deep well of, because we're a younger community overall. You see much deeper roots of philanthropy when you have these older communities where generations of wealth have done things like create family foundations and really create a structure of support. But we're a younger community overall. The oil boom of the 19 you name it is still in our recent memory, and that transfer of wealth hasn't put our community in the place where we have those kind of philanthropic foundations. You see, James Devin Munkus being one of these few real leading philanthropists who's helping make that transfer a reality. But so the idea that our private sector businesses then would step in, businesses are businesses. It's like, Jackie, hey, you want to sponsor Festival International? You got $100,000. It's great exposure for you. But I know you have other priorities too.
Well, and I've already committed to the Downtown Burger Battle Royale, Sam. So I can only commit to so many things at a time.
Exactly. But that's the thing, is that, everybody, I'm sure when asked, is willing to do some part if it makes sense, but it doesn't just automatically step in and happen.
Right.
So there's really is a role for public investment to help make sure that there's a strong foundation that you can build all these great, wonderful castles off of. In the case of Edinburgh, they built actual castles and people go visit them.
Right.
Well,
Well, and
that's
so
to go to war. That was a whole different thing.
oh, yeah. You think about infrastructure and the infrastructure we've built, and I look around downtown and we built these beautiful park stages and these areas for festivals. And so to me, it seems like we've invested in the infrastructure, and you don't have that boom bust from our cultural economy the way you do from other industry. And so it feels to me like as long as we keep investing in our cultural economy, it continues to grow. Is that not the right way to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a funny thing because as I was talking about, it's like this kind of groundswell effect. It is like small scale investments, little tiny things that can spread out, or those kind of infrastructure investments like a park or a venue that can then affect lots and lots and lots of different people, all the different people who perform at ACA, whether it's a show that we put on, or it's the symphony putting on their own performance, or whether it's, an outside promoter, a ballet company, whatever. They're all paying their people. That's all, they're collecting tickets, they're selling a product, and they're putting it back into the community, into this community. And it's incredible. And it's a lot of economic activity that happens because you have that asset. Whether it's Park International downtown as a venue that lets Festival International, that lets ACLA, that lets any number of other, Downtown Rising, Downtown Alive, that lets a lot
Patty
of
in the Park.
That lets a ton of kind of informally or separately organized activities happen. Those things don't necessarily happen without that asset. So it is about finding those strategic little pieces of the puzzle that say, this is what we're missing, this is what we need, that can at least fill in the gaps so that the private sector can come and activate and pour their own resources and their own energy and creativity into these activities that they wouldn't be able to do, on the backyard stage at the Blue Moon Saloon, because you can only put 50 people there.
Right. Although I feel like I've been there with 250, but I know what you mean.
I mean, I was going to give them an out, but yeah, definitely.
So when I think about the venues, as we're talking about them, and there's all this talk around the Hyman, and maybe, it's going to be replaced soon. Should its replacement be located downtown to tie into all that we already have down here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just, again, my background is in cultural policy, and basically the study of making decisions like that. And in Edinburgh, we were talking about a very, very similar project, which was creating a mid-sized venue for the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which would, their whole thing was, it's going to cost $100 million, and we're going to make this beautiful world-class place. Frank Gehry's going to design it. It's going to be this this landmark piece of the city, but it needs to be a mid-sized venue. It needs to be flexible in what it can do. It needs to be able to host a convention as easily as a, seated concert performance, as easily as a standing room show, as easily as have, 2 separate wedding receptions happening simultaneously. And it needs to be in an area where that activity creates foot traffic around it. And that foot traffic deposits those people into restaurants, bars, other venues, to create that swell of activity, basically a tornado of economic activity. And that only works, it only happens, and it only brings back to the public good from an economic perspective if it's in a downtown. So, you might have a big field somewhere, and I know UL's got like 50 of them, but none of those should house a performing arts center. At least, we shouldn't spend a public dollar building a performing arts center to do that, because it wouldn't come back to the public good.
Right.
You don't build a lighthouse, 10 miles inland. You build it in a harbor where there's boats coming and going.
Right. Right. So I'm mentally walking around downtown right now thinking of the best areas. So is that like a 2-block, 3-block radius where we should plant this new convention center? Because I feel like there's a couple different options, and I would be super excited.
There's definitely options. There's options there's land. There's so much land downtown that's just parking lots.
Right.
That's just surface parking lots, or that is, that are just green fields when you think about getting closer to the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I think places like that too, where you think about the Rosa Parks Center as this kind of multimodal transportation hub. That's another piece too. When you say, hey, we're going to make a performing arts center and a convention center that's downtown, that's really accessible. You can walk around, once you're there, but also you can get there by bus. You could get there from New Orleans or Houston by train.
Right.
Those are really exciting additional possibilities. And I think it's another reason to be kind of close to that kind of transportation hub in downtown Lafayette. So yeah, absolutely. And when you think about, how I-49 and the Evangeline Thruway has been such a wall between downtown and neighborhoods on the other side, as we look at, a potential I-49 project someday, maybe, a project like this could really help bridge and connect those communities too, and serve as, amidst a wall, it could be a gateway.
Right.
So
that's amazing.
Let's do that.
Well, I'm thinking about the possibilities, to have, because we've participated in events at the Hyman, over the years, just like everybody else. And so to have that new convention center venue opportunity that's flexible and putting it downtown where everything else circles around it, like you said, a tornado, all of a sudden the possibilities are endless.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. That's the difference between just making a cultural investment or a civic investment and making a smart one.
Right. Right.
And when it takes into account where we really can we picture 50 years from now that venue being almost as old as the Hyman Center and what it looks like around it? Because the Hyman Center is a good example of a place that is not necessarily on a real commercial corridor.
Right.
It was built where it was, a lot of the reasons because of the philanthropy of the time, of the community of the time. But, I might be the only person who's walked to the Hyman Center. But I walk. So.
Well, and I'm a big fan of walking too, but that's a hike all the way to the Hyman.
Talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I see little Sam in his suit walking down St. Mary. That's very funny to me. So y'all were able to do some things during this pandemic at the ACA. And the first thing that pops into my mind is the Illustrated Cafe. So walk us through how that came to be, what the experience has been like for people who haven't seen it yet, what it is.
Absolutely. So the Illustrated Cafe is a project by Aileen Bennett, who is a designer and artist, more newly an artist, and an illustrator in particular. And Aileen came to us with the idea for an exhibition that she really wanted to be playful and immersive and fun. And the idea is that you would be able to walk into this space that is an actual functioning cafe, which we do have here in our building at ACA. It's open to the public Tuesday through Saturday. But that you'd be able to really walk into this space and that it be this illustrated environment. So it feel like and look like you're walking into a picture book. And that goes from, all of the tables and chairs being, basically being designed and decorated such that they look like hand-drawn illustrations. There's a lot of fun, like 2D things that look 3D. There's a lot of 3D things that are real that look 2D. So a lot of little surprises and tricks of the eye throughout the space. So that occupies most of our front window space at the ACA. So if you think about passing by on Vermilion and the kind of front doors of the building, the whole large window area to the right of our front doors, which is our cafe. And the goal is to have something that, invites people in, that sparks curiosity, and that says, that invites you to say, come find out what this is. You don't want it to be obvious. We want it to be to spark curiosity. And for them, and for it to bring people into the building who otherwise might not come in because they look at us and they say, oh, that kind of looks like a bank, or maybe that's some kind of fancy museum, but I'm not invited. Because we are an art center and our exhibitions and our galleries are free to the public and we're open every day, and communicating that message and making that connection for our community is one of our big jobs. And it's one that, we don't get paid back for because it is free. So we have to find every creative way to say it and to connect with people, because we, unless people walk in the building and we can't force them in, then we're not necessarily making an impact on them through our exhibitions, through the artwork we display. And it's our goal, and it's our desperate desire to make that connection. So her project's really fun.
It's very cool. And I've seen a lot of people interacting with it and really getting into it and digging it and just loving it. How can people support the ACA right now? Through memberships?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we rely on our members, which are just, members of the community who are willing to donate at an annual level. They start at $35 a year, pretty small. All things considered, we definitely look for higher levels of support too. We kind of have 3 affinity tiers, and at the higher affinities, we do a lot more like VIP treatment and special events and receptions and things like that. So there's good reasons if you're interested in diving deeper into the arts and culture scene to become a member of the ACA. I actually see it as like 3 circles. You want to be like on your pathway in. And so right here in the middle, is the people who get the highest level of kind of access, get those like backstage tours and meet and greets with artists and all kinds of things like that. And yeah, without our members, we couldn't do half of what we do. It's our driving force, again, because our galleries are free and open to the public. And when we put on performances, we're putting them on for them to be accessible to the community, for them to be, low enough ticket prices that with a small 300-seat theater and with reduced capacity, where we might only have 75 seats, that it's still economically attainable to the average working person. So that is also supported by our members and sponsors. Otherwise, without their support, we would have to be, economically, we'd have to be a very kind of elite institution. Ticket prices would be $150 for a better known artist or more. Our galleries, we'd have to charge. And these are all things that, certain kinds of museums and art centers do around the country, but we exist to support and connect this community. So with the support of our members, we think we're able to do that pretty well. So yes, if you're listening to this, please become a member of the ACA. Go to acadianacenterforthearts.org or call us at 337-233-7060.
I feel like it's a telethon right now. We have a question. Jessica says, I'm curious, what has been your most memorable experience at ACA? Other than the pandemic.
The funny thing about the pandemic is that it's basically erased all memories, which is why the year feels so long. Honestly, I mentioned earlier that performance with Scott Mulvihill, who's a bass player and has a really awesome band, and the Rayo Brothers as the openers, which was our last show before the pandemic struck. That's been a very vivid memory for me, just because I've probably been sitting with it for 8 months now. And it was just such it was a night where at the end of it, I was thinking, this is exactly what we should be doing. It was this, great touring musician who no one had heard of, who was on his kind of upward trajectory, who's incredible. And it was a great local band, the Rayo Brothers, opening for them. And there were a lot of people in the audience who either were there because they were familiar with the Rayo Brothers, or maybe they had heard of Scott Mulvihill, or maybe they just had heard that there was a cool thing happening at the ACA. And we got to them and they showed up. And it was just this wonderful crowd and wonderful spirit. And everybody was kind of like learning about different music and getting exposed to new things and just having what seemed like an incredible, incredible time. And again, I'm stuck with that in my mind as just being a perfect night. It was a very diverse audience. It was a younger audience. And it's just something that I treasure and look forward to being able to get back to in a real way.
Right. How do y'all select the artists who are going to perform? Do you pick them? Do people reach out to you? Is it kind of a blend of both?
It is a blend of both. I mean, we are a venue, so we'll work with other, promoters and presenters in town. But typically for those, it tends to be things like the symphony puts on their own shows. We don't have a lot of promoters other than like the ACA. We have a few, but not ones that are putting on shows at our scale. So then the shows that we do put on ourselves, it's about relationships with agents and touring artists, and we're always just trying to bring in national talent that has never been to this community before, and that is different kinds of music. We do get much larger scale, like country and Christian concerts in town. You'll see those at the Cajun Dome, but we're talking about bringing through other kinds of music. We want to see those, kind of like rootsy folk bands. We want to see blues. We want to see jazz. We want to see, alternative rock. We want to see, I don't know, just the full gamut of music, and especially the kind that's best experienced in a small, intimate space.
Right. I mean, I think about that. I'm guessing that's the same way it works for you selecting the artists that go into the gallery as well, right? You recruit them, they approach you, kind of a similar situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And for our exhibitions, we tend to we'll either do like solo exhibitions, like we have one coming up. We'll do a kind of review of a local artist, Stephanie Patton, and her work later this spring. And Stephanie's an artist who is an internationally shown artist, is incredible, and just one of those wild talents that lives in our community too. So this is a little bit like a mid-career retrospective, or kind of review of her work to date, because she's a really active artist. And so we did select her as somebody who we really wanted to highlight, back here in her home community too, because people don't necessarily know about her unless you know her.
Right.
And she hasn't shown here in big ways, in the same ways that she does in New York or or Tokyo, or other big cities with these big art markets. And the other way that we put on shows is group exhibitions. So we will announce we're going to have an exhibition coming up in January called Slammed, which is going to be about the intersection of kind of performance and like as it happens in professional wrestling, and just that kind of like playful element of like public performance and attitude. And we're inviting artists to respond to that theme. And also, it's a very playful idea. It's about not taking art for art's sake too seriously. It's about making sure that it is about communicating something and connecting with people. But in that case, we're going to be advertising that as an open call for artists of whatever kind, of whatever background, within basically the Gulf South region to submit. And then our curator, together with the curator at the Hilliard Museum, are co-curating that show.
Awesome.
And they'll select from the submissions the works that they want to really build the show around. So it's kind of those two different ways. We'll really go after artists, but we'll create these open calls as well that say, look, we're doing a show that's on this topic. We want to explore women landscape painters. We want to explore professional wrestling. We want to explore this topic. If we don't know about you, let us know about you.
I feel like somebody must have made a comment in passing that the ACA is too highbrow, and you want to prove them wrong right now. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, we're not a highbrow community.
No.
And I think it's really to our benefit. When people's idea of a rehearsal dinner for a wedding is a crawfish boil, you're not in a highbrow community. And that's great, because it takes away so much of the pretense. I mean, if you think about how much time and money people waste just trying to appear grandiose, and they could have spent that time and money actually having a good time and actually, celebrating their culture and their heritage and their community. I mean, that's the backbone of who we are, I think, is that we're not this kind of highbrow community.
Right.
And in some ways, we're at our worst when we are that.
Years ago, there was a show on AOC that the now super successful on SEAL team actor Judd Lormand hosted. That was all about wrestling, specifically, I think it's Mid-South wrestling. So I'm wondering if y'all are going to pull some of those old episodes or get Judd to come in and actually, as a part of the curation of this show, provide his own narration like he used to do on that TV show.
I can reveal nothing about it.
Okay.
The opening of that exhibition.
All right. But really, how funny would that be? That's a funny tie-in. I like it already.
Absolutely.
So, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to kind of touch on a few things that maybe people don't know about you. And so one of my favorite are the lightning round questions here. Lightning round. So first thing that comes to your mind, favorite place on earth?
Ooh, Paleo-Hora, Crete, which is where my wife and I did our honeymoon. We went to Crete. We kind of wandered around. We kind of had a no agenda trip, and we stumbled upon this little like beach bum community called Paleo-Hora on the southern coast of Crete. And we were just like, why don't we just stay here for the rest of our lives?
I mean, is it what I imagine when I think of that area? Is it, white buildings, blue roofs, beautiful sea?
Yeah, absolutely. Except that this community was also like colonized by hippies in the 1970s. So it's that plus a ton of hippies. So there's like one of the best vegan restaurant I've ever been to was in Paleo-Hora. And it's in Crete, which is overall a pretty kind of conservative, buttoned up island community, but in this funky, hilarious beach town.
So it's like a European Malibu.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is super hippie. I know people think about it for the celebrity aspect. But that's a very small percentage. Most of Malibu is just a big hippie community.
Exactly.
That's so cool. Okay. Movie you can't turn off.
Ooh, a movie that I can't turn off, and one that I would actually like watch back to back before was Gosford Park it's a Robert Altman movie as the director. And it was written by the guy who more infamously went on to write Downton Abbey. So it's similarly like set in a kind of country manor, but it's an Altman movie. So it's also very kind of subversive and strange, and people are talking over one another all the time. But it's the kind of movie you can rewatch, and it's quiet enough in a lovely British way. But it's interesting enough that you can, every time you see it, you pick up on 10 new things. So Gosford Park.
That's an interesting juxtaposition, and I've not seen it, so I'm gonna have to put it on my list now.
I would recommend it. It's in my top 3.
Okay, good to know. Okay, Sam, I'm pretty sure you're smarter than me, so I'm assuming you don't watch TV at all. But if you did, what would be a TV show that you would like to binge watch?
Oh, I mean, my wife and I are in the process of binge watching The Great British Bake Off, and I highly recommend it. We watched a lot about a year ago, and we came back to it just a month ago. We just recently had a baby. So, you need that kind of midnight, late night viewing that is also it's both bingeable and, addictive.
Right.
But is also very much about people complimenting one another.
The perfect pandemic show. When we had little babies, my binge, because, we didn't have Netflix and Hulu in those dark days. And so my binge was pop-up videos on VH1.
Oh.
And they were on 24/7 late night. And so it was something easy you could have in the background while trying to soothe a child who was needing to eat at 3 a.m. Pop-up videos. Favorite book? But I loved it, the little pop, pop.
Exactly. I love that.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? Oof. I've been in a reread as well, kind of like a comfort reread of the works of Terry Pratchett. And one of his books, I mean, I've read a lot of serious literature in my time, but I'm in a mode where I don't care for it. And what I want is something that is light and fun and funny. And Terry Pratchett is my guy. And one of his books that was one of his kind of later works is called Thud. It's the end of a very long series because he would write tons. He's written more books than, any 50 authors combined. He was the best-selling author before J.K. Rowling, and Thud just goes down in history as one of my favorite books, at least my favorite reread of this year.
Awesome.
I don't know if I have a new read this year. It's been a bad year in that way.
Have you let James at Beausoleil Books know so he can stock up for you?
I have not yet, but I have been over to Beausoleil Books and I bought a lovely, lovely edition of the Complete Odes of Pablo Neruda.
Ooh,
which that is also one of my wife's favorite as well. So,
that's awesome.
Poetry side, that's a whole different discussion.
Sure, of course. Favorite podcast?
Favorite podcast? Ooh, I'm an avid podcast listener. And right now, my favorite podcast is called the Omnibus Podcast.
Ah.
John Roderick, who is an old alt rocker from Seattle, and Ken Jennings, the all-time world champion of Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
They have a podcast where they talk about obscura. So, random topics that are obscure that they want to preserve for future generations because they assume that the apocalypse is looming any day now.
Well, that's a light experience. That is awesome. I know you're a big walker, but do you have a favorite car?
No, I don't have a favorite car.
All right. And this might be like trying to pick amongst your favorite people, but do you have a favorite festival?
Favorite festival? I mean, this is going to seem like such a cop-out because it's kind of a family matter, but Festival de Acadiana Creole is my favorite festival. Admittedly, it was started by my father-in-law, but it was my favorite festival before I married his daughter, too.
Sure.
So, but it's just such a wonderful, spirited kind of community gathering. And if you listen to me at all today, I think that, what makes our culture and community strong is when people come together to, celebrate, to listen to music, to dance, to have a good time in a way that's unpretentious and casual. And I think Festival de Acadiana, even more so than Festival International, is that real festival that really brings kind of our local community together to spend time together in that way.
Right. Favorite musician?
Favorite musician? I think it's still probably Andrew Bird. I haven't, I did a very, very deep, long dive with Andrew Bird, and I've kind of never come out of that love relationship for him and his music. Someday I'll get to bring him to ACA or to Lafayette. We've talked to his manager a lot.
That would be awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Favorite fine artist or artist in general?
Oh man, favorite artist in general. Always one of the most difficult questions. Somebody asked me that question a couple of years ago, and I was just like, I don't know. Say anything. Just say anything. I was like, well, now I really don't know. But I mean, an easy go-to for me is actually somebody like Stephanie Patton. I love her artwork. It's phenomenal. And then she's also one of those kind of artists who mentors and brings up people behind them and is just like such a supporter and teacher of other generations. And so she's just an incredible artist in terms of the work she makes, in terms of how fun it is, in terms of how heady and explorative it is, and as well as just like you couldn't have a better person.
Right. So, no, that's a great answer. Okay, last but not least, the favorite concert you've ever been to?
Favorite concert I've ever been to? Jeez Louise. An incredibly difficult question.
I'm known for the hard-hitting, tough questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh. I have to say, I saw Wilco in New Orleans at the Lyceum with my brother, and we had really good seats. And that was a really just kind of, I wasn't even necessarily that big a Wilco fan before, but it was one of those just like concert nights that was just like, yeah, this is epic. Everything happening here is happening. And that scale of concert for me is rare. I really like the smaller, the a little more intimate. I like dancing. So, in terms of concert, yeah.
That's a good choice.
I probably should have said what happened at the ACA Theater.
I think we should get him to come here. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Sam, our time is winding down. I cannot thank you enough for spending this hour with me, and to everybody who was watching and commenting. I appreciate y'all being a part of this experience. I hope that we all get to spend time together at the ACA soon. And in the meantime, I need y'all to buy memberships to support it, to keep it going. Check out the Illustrated Cafe. Get ready to swing by when Stephanie Patton shows up, and overall do everything you can to keep this cultural necessity a part of our community and thriving. Sam, thank you very much.
Come by the ACA any day. Come say hello. Come have a cup of coffee. Love to see you. Absolutely.
That would be great. And thank you all very much. And we'll see y'all next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Well, the day is through.